Hey there, and welcome to the DFS Build NBA Edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go down over the showdown slate for the Mavs and Celtics. We got a game 5. I didn't think it would happen. I thought it was going to be a full sweep, but Dallas came out and completely throttled Boston. Dallas was just, defensively just spot on, just limiting the Celtics inside, closing out on threes, messing stuff up, getting every freaking rebound possible. Luka was a boss as a pure scorer early in that game. 29 real points in only 33 minutes. Um, Kyrie did enough with 21 real points of his own. And really, I think the story of the game was the rebounding. Derek Lively had 12 rebounds and he chipped in 11 points. Um, you know, just they dominated the glass and they just played so well defensively that it allowed a 25 whatever it was point cushion in the first half to just stay there. I really thought, just because it's Boston and they've been so dominant that like it was still possible going in the second half that the Celtics just make history and storm back and all that. But here we are, 3-1, and we have to, at least in the back of our mind, still think about narratives to some degree. And there's really two of them. Is it actually possible for Dallas to keep this going and keep the dream alive of becoming the only team ever in NBA history to come back from a 3-0 finals deficit? Or are the Celtics going to crush them and end this thing? Once again, I lean more towards Boston here. They are at home. I'm wondering if there's anything to that, like complacency in the previous game and or wanting to win in front of their home crowd. Or maybe Dallas figured something out, or maybe Porzingis not being there was a pretty huge deal. We're going to find out possibly about that just because Porzingis is questionable for this game. His status is going to be pretty key. So if he's out, obviously that is a pretty big deal across the board. And if he's in, obviously he's going to look pretty appealing for DFS purposes. But, narrative street or not, and where the series is and where you think it's going, that honestly is irrelevant. Just trying to predict blowouts is silly because nobody really thought Dallas was going to win by like 40 points or whatever it was. And especially not in that fashion. If there was going to be a blowout in that last game, most people would have been assuming Boston would have, cleaned up there and ran away with the sweep, but they didn't. So we just got to play it as a regular game and move on here. So I'm going to break this down and point you to my favorite plays for this game, and also talk about some of the value plays, and hopefully get you in the right direction to get a winning lineup for Monday night. Get the week started off right. If I help you out in any way, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. We do breakdown videos for the major sports, NFL, NBA, MLB, and hopefully we'll get some more new MLB videos out this week. All right, let's get to it for the NBA video or NBA slate for Monday. Starting on the Dallas side, obviously, I'm not going to waste time on Luka. He is a smash play. He's got the best projection, best ceiling, best everything. He's going to be owned. My only advice would be to be a little bit underweight in the captain slot and slide him over to utility. I've been doing that for forever throughout the playoffs, and really that process has not burned me. What's burned me is not being on the right captain at the right time. On to Kyrie we go. So Kyrie actually was in the game I played. He was the winning captain play, and I had talked about just a lack of reliable upside with him. And I don't think I was wrong about that still. He only actually had 35 fantasy points. And what I said last time was spot on. He can get going as a scorer, but he's not going to do a whole lot else. So he did have 21 real points, but he only hit 1 3, and he had like 6 assists and 4 rebounds, but just not monster peripherals. So obviously I was proven wrong in the fact that he was the winning captain play for the main tournament I was in. So you can definitely still get away with rostering him. I just wasn't super excited about paying for him in utility. So my literal advice was actually to either use him in captain or go away from him, considering he was going to be like the third chalkiest play of the slate. So if you captained him, that actually would have worked out pretty well. So that actually stayed with what my approach was. It was just captain or bust, basically. And yeah, at 35 fantasy points in utility, I think you probably could have gotten by without using him in utility, as the results kind of suggested. But going into this game, if Dallas is going to have a chance, Kyrie's going to have a big game. I'm kind of looking at it the same way. I think he's a totally fine play. I just would prefer him in captain if I'm going to use him. Totally nothing wrong with him in utility. And like I said, if they're going to win or keep it close, I'm assuming Kyrie's going to have a pretty decent game. The only the only issue is he's coming at 44% overall owned. So I have, again, no issue with going away from him just because he's not just this monster DFS performer. That would be Luka, obviously. PJ Washington, I'm going to say the same thing I say every single time I break down the maps. This guy continues to get monster minutes. I don't think we can really glean much from the last game. He only played 14 minutes, but he also had 4 fouls. So honestly, him not doing anything in that blowout win only helps and keeps my interest pretty tight here. He's only coming at 36% overall ownership, but he's not very expensive in the utility. He's only coming in at 5.8K. He actually dropped by $400. So once again, very interested in PJ Washington. He has not hit for me in this series, but he's also not been a total dud. So if you're using him at a nice little price in the utility and you're looking for 26 to 30 fantasy points, he'll get you there. That'll be fine. But he's playing like 40 minutes. Eventually the guy is going to get to that ceiling, which he has displayed in the playoffs before. And if you think Dallas is going to stay in this game or even win it, then PJ Washington looks like a really, really intriguing captain play just because he's not going to be very owned. I would imagine maybe 5 or 6% owned max in the captain slot. So not like I'm going crazy with PJ Washington as my main captain guy or anything, but anytime a guy has a really good role, is out on the floor a ton, has displayed an ability, to get there in the past in the captain slot with that kind of ceiling, and is it going to be owned? I definitely have interest. So PJ Washington is one of my favorite captain plays after we get away from the top guys. And at 5.8K, really, really nice, decent utility play. If you don't want to captain him, I think he's still a really good play right there in utility. So next we got Derek Lively, who bounced back in a big way in the last game. He had 30 fantasy points. He had a really good game the game before that with 34 fantasy points, 2 straight double-doubles. He is cleaning up on the glass, 25 rebounds over his last 2 games. That has proven to be a dramatic difference in this series because Derek Lively kind of was a no-show for the first 2 games. Obviously, the first game was a blowout, and the second game, they could have used that rebounding and scoring inside. I don't know if it's just a Porzingis effect and him not being there. I had alluded to that being possible, whereas I wasn't going to be very interested in Lively if Porzingis was in. But if Porzingis is out, I am smashing Derek Lively at this 5.4K utility price. Porzingis' status is really going to do a lot for me in this game just because he does change everything. He had been having a really good series, and now he's not healthy all of a sudden. So if he's in, I would really be checking the news waves there and looking at what the coaches are saying just to get a good idea of like what his role is going to be, how healthy he actually is, and all that. But if Porzingis is in, I have a little bit less interest in Lively, and I'd feel a little bit less confident in the Dallas Bigs. But I don't really think he's going to play in this game because Boston's at home and they probably think they can just get away with not forcing it here. And if that's the case, Derek Lively looks like a smash play at 5.4K in the utility. That's probably where I'm going to keep him. He's coming in only 31% owned across the board, which I think is a bit too low. So I would be overweight on him for sure in utility, and I'd have a little sprinkling of him in the captain slot just because he's exhibited a bit of a ceiling for that price. I mean, 30 to 35 fantasy points. That's literally all it took with Kyrie last game. And you're paying significantly less to get something like that. So assuming Luka and Tatum and like Jalen and of course Kyrie don't go nuke the slate, I think you could get away with Derek Lively in the captain, and I think he can certainly get you there as far as where his projection is at and what he's capable of doing. Daniel Gafford, a little less interested in him if I'm going after Lively. It's just not very common for these two guys to both feast in the same game. I think you can pair them together just because the price points, and they both can get there, mostly because Gafford is a very good per minute guy. And they both have clear paths to double doubles and easy, buckets and lobs and putbacks and all that stuff. And they both can have block parties and get a lot of rebounds. So they do a lot of stuff when they're out there. Right now, the guy who's safer is easily Lively. He's going to get more minutes because he's just crushing it on the glass and he's just playing really well across the board. Gafford only getting 26 total minutes in his last 2 games, despite only having committed 3 fouls. That's a little worrisome. Last game, obviously, it's mostly about the blowout, but the fact that he didn't get a little bit more run, even so, I don't know, just 10 minutes in that game, it's a little suspicious. So I do like the price point at 4.2K, and if the ownership's going to, crazily flock towards Lively, we certainly can entertain the idea of going majorly overweight on a 25% on Gafford. I don't think I'd roll the dice with him at captain, but at utility at 4.2K, you can certainly do worse just because he's, like I said, a good per minute guy. Derek Jones Jr., his role has taken quite a hit. Obviously, we can't, read into that too much from the most recent game where he only played 17 minutes and he did have 3 fouls in the game. But the game before that, he only had 16 minutes too. So, and this has been a guy who had previously been playing like about 30, 35 minutes in most games during the playoffs. Maybe Dallas just finally figured something out that he was just a major problem for their offense. I mean, it may have been the case. He had not scored in double figures in like 5 of his last 6 games now. So obviously, if he's not helping his offense, he's hurting them. So if he's only going to get about 15, 17 minutes, I don't have any concerns fading him at 3.8K. He's coming in at 23% ownership. So while that's certainly not chalky on a showdown slate, I think if we can go pivot to somebody else, he's not a great per minute guy anyways. I don't mind getting away from him. One of the guys, obviously, right away that would potentially stand out would be Josh Green. 18 minutes on blowout. That's pretty nice. 22 minutes the game before that. That's even better. So I'm assuming we can bank on 20 plus minutes from him here. Assuming the Mavs don't fall in love with Tim Hardaway Jr. after he hit like 5 threes in the last game. I think they're smarter than that. I hope, because obviously Tim Hardaway Jr. is not going to do that every time, and also he's pretty washed at this point. Josh Green is not the best DFS performer, but at 3K flat, if we're getting at 20 minutes from him, I feel pretty good about him, and I would prefer him over Derek Jones Jr. It's better price play, and you're not losing anything as far as, ceiling or really a projection when you're looking at the price, I don't think. You have Tim Hardaway Jr., obviously, 12 minutes in the last game, 22 fantasy points, 19 minutes in the game before that. So obviously he's got to roll again, but you're probably looking at 12 to 15 minutes if he's hitting his shots. You can do it. You can play Tim Hardaway Jr. The thing is, he might end up being kind of chalky. Right now he's coming at 15% owned. I don't know. If Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to be chalky, I might look to do something different. A couple options would be obviously Dante Exum at 2.2K, 14 minutes in the blowout. He played pretty well, so it wouldn't be crazy at all to see Exum actually get 10 to 15 minutes again. If he's going to come out and hit his threes and everything, it would be smart for Dallas to play him a little bit more. Kleba, man, he just has not really been getting it done as a whole throughout the series. But the logic still is there for Kleba to be a hit. Number one, 2.4K, so super cheap. So obviously, the showdown slate, you can have like your main core set. You can have the captain you're in love with, and you can have Tatum and Luka and whoever else, and then you can just kind of rotate these cheap punt guys if you want to do it that way. But Kleba honestly could be a core play. 23 minutes, 10 fantasy points in the last game. Finally hit a 3, first made 3 of the entire series. He still only has 1 block in the series. He's not really rebounding very well, so he's not getting it done at all. But the minutes have been there. He's played 16 plus minutes in 3 of the 4 games so far in the series for him. So if Porzingis was back, I would feel really good about Kleba just because of the price, and I know they need him. But even without Porzingis, I think he's still pretty viable at 2.4K. It just, can the guy just actually show up and get some blocks and hit some more threes? It'd be nice, but honestly, at 2.4K, you don't need the world from Kleba. As long as he can do something close to what he did in the last game, he would be viable. The other guy would have been Jaden Hardy at 2K flat, but 13 minutes in the blowout win, and he only had 4 minutes and 2 minutes in the previous 2 games. So I don't think we can really trust that. I think that's just based off the blowout. So I'm not super excited about Jaden Hardy, and like I said, not super into THJ. I'd be looking to get involved with the Dallas value in other ways, being Josh Green and Maxi Kleba for the most part. All right, over to Boston we go. Let's switch it up over here. Same with Luka. I'm not going to spend any time on Jason Tatum. He's a stud. You can absolutely captain him. I am just going to slide him and Luka over to the utility slot for the most part. I will say, same thing I said going in the last game. If you think this is it and Boston's going to win this series, Tatum's going to be vying for that NBA Finals MVP trophy. The narratives are a real thing in NBA. I think. I mean, it can be noisy, 100%. It can be noisy. Obviously, with the results of last game baked into it, it was noisy. But if the Celtics are going to win, I would not be shocked if Tatum had a massive game and left no doubt as far as the NBA Finals MVP race goes. I mean, right now it's between him, Drew Holiday, and Jaylen Brown, and really it's between him and Jaylen Brown. And who's the alpha on this team? It is Tatum. So I would imagine if Boston won this game, all three of those guys do well. But I would fully expect Tatum to have a much, much better game than he'd had last game. 15 minutes and 27 points, or in 27 minutes, he did not show up. For the most part in the series, he's been kind of held in check. He has not been shooting efficiently. His best shooting game was 42% when he had 31 real points in game 3. In the first 2 games, he did not top 18 points. He's failed to top 18 points in 3 of the 4 games. So he has not been getting it done really as an offensive player. So I would not be shocked though at home in this obviously huge game to win the title for him to pop off here. So I'll have a decent amount of him in the captain because I'm a believer that is a very real possibility. But he's going to be owned. So it's not like I'm the only one thinking that Tatum is a smash play by any means. So for the most part, I'll be trying to get different and sliding him with Luka into utility. Jaylen Brown is obviously right up there with Jason Tatum. He's going to be pretty owned. He's only projecting at 10% lower ownership. He's coming in at 11 points fewer for his fantasy projection. He's a somewhat okay leverage on Tatum. If you think Tatum's just going to continue to have a horrific NBA Finals, and I guess horrific is a bit harsh, but it hasn't been great. He's just been one of the best plays on Boston's team as far as overall production. But I mean, obviously, right now, Jaylen Brown's probably the best. And if you're looking at NBA Finals MVP, it's just going to come down to which of one of those two dudes has the better game at the end of the series if Boston wins. So Jaylen Brown was really, really bad in the last game from a fantasy perspective. 3 for 12 shooting, 10 real points, 13 fantasy points. It was pretty brutal. So I expect a firm bounce back. And I still prefer Tatum between the two. I think he's just got a better floor and ceiling. But Brown has had a better series so far. He has, for the most part, figured out the Dallas defense. In 3 out of 4 games, he's had 40 plus fantasy points and 21 plus real points. So he was shooting 53% or better in every game until basically nobody in Boston could hit the broadside of the barn. So Jaylen Brown looks good. If the ownership, shows us that Luka and Tatum and Kyrie are going to be the 3 highest owned guys, then Jaylen Brown really quickly looks like a pretty intriguing captain play. It's been proven over time that pretty much anybody can be viable as a captain. And if you can get somebody at sub 10% ownership at captain, that's really all it takes. And I think that's a very real possibility with Jaylen Brown in a massive, title clinching game at home in front of the Boston fans. So Brown looks good. I still think I prefer Tatum. But if you want to factor in ownership and leverage on the Tatum ownership, I think Brown in the captain slot is plenty viable. At 9.8K for utility, it's a little bit steep for me. Not auto play by any means. He's still a high usage guy on the best team in the NBA. But that's a little bit steep. I would rather just try to force Luka and Tatum in there instead of Brown. Porzingis at 8K, really, really good price for utility. Really, really intriguing for captain if he plays. Porzingis was really good in the first 2 games as far as a price point play and just an ownership play. He had 34 and 22 fantasy points. Obviously not nearly as good in the second game. And the first game was actually a blowout. So he was like super, super efficient. But both games he shot the ball well. He shot better than 57% in both games. He rebounded okay. He had a couple of blocks. So if he plays and he gets 20 to 25 minutes and Boston's going to win, I would imagine he ends up having a pretty good game. At 8K, that's not really hurting you too much at utility, and he just won't be owned. So I think for the most part, I would be looking to play him at captain if I played him at all. But 8K is pretty reasonable, especially with Derek White at 7.6 and Drew at 7K flat. Like if those 2 guys are going to be chalky as they always are, Porzingis possibly low owned if he ended up playing would be kind of interesting. I'm only saying that just to give you a breakdown in case Porzingis is a surprise active. I don't think he plays. I don't think that they need him to win the title. I don't they don't need him to win this game. So I think if they lose this game and it like got to a game 7, I think we see Porzingis again, but I don't think he's going to play this game, so I don't think that matters. So with that said, Derek White and Drew Holiday, they're kind of the same play. I've been saying it the whole time. I just prefer the guy usually that's going to be a little bit less owned. And for the most part, it's going to be Derek White because he's more expensive. Neither of these guys showed up in the last game, but at least I was right about not eating Drew chalk for the last 2 games. He had 24 and 17 fantasy points in the last 2 games. I had been saying all along, I definitely ate my L's a couple times in some of these showdown breakdowns, but I just did not believe in Drew Holiday's crazy efficiency, and I didn't think he was sustainable. And sure enough, I mean, in 4 of his last 5 games, he's had 32 or fewer fantasy points. So I think for Drew, anything over 30 is a win in a showdown slate. But at 7K, I think he's a fine utility play. Not really racing to play him in the captain. And right now his ownership's coming at 42%, and Derek White's at 43%. Very similar plays. I prefer Derek White. I think he's got a better floor, better ceiling, and especially if they're going to be coming in with a similar projection and similar ownership, I'm just going to take the guy that I think I feel a little bit better about. And I think at the end of the day, Drew, because he's cheaper, is going to be a little bit more owned, even though right now the ownership projection does not reflect that logic. That said, you can play them both in captain. They're both capable of getting 40 plus fantasy points. Drew has had some really big games in the playoffs already, a couple 50 plus fantasy point burger games. So certainly in play. I just don't think I'll be going out of my way to captain either of those guys necessarily in game 5. Al Horford at 6K flat is an awesome utility play with Porzingis probably out, and also a really good captain play. Somebody pointed out in the comment section that he was actually the captain winner for a Millie Maker game a couple of games ago. So, the crazy thing is he wasn't even that good. He only had 23 fantasy points. It's just that's the way the lineup broke. And honestly, you look at the last game, it's really tough to glean too much from like a 40-point drubbing when like the teams clear their benches and the studs are just awful. Horford was another one of them that did not do well. He only took 1 shot in 23 minutes. I don't know what that's all about. But he's not really a high usage guy in general. So I guess we shouldn't be too shocked about that. Naturally, he only had 14 fantasy points and was a total bust. But, Boston's back at home. Porzingis is probably out, and he's not expensive. So I like Horford still quite a bit. I think you can slide him into captain pretty comfortably and, open up some salary. But if you don't want to do that at 6K flat, slide him into utility super, super easy. So I definitely have a lot of interest in that. And he's coming in only at 36% ownership. Feels a little bit low, so I would probably be a little bit overweight on Al Horford as well. Sam Hauser at 3.4K is probably the first value that stands out for Boston. He's played 10 plus minutes in every game in this series. That's always good to see. They want his shooting out there. They are launching threes left and right, and he gets tons of open shots with the Dallas defense focusing on obviously Tatum and Jalen. He hit 5 of 7 shots last game with 4 made threes, 3 made threes the game before. So he's hitting his shots and he's taking his shots. He's had 15 plus fantasy points in 3 of the 4 games. And for 3.4K, if he can get there, I'm golden. That's all I really want from him. He had his best game last game because he got a little extra run with 20 minutes and 21 fantasy points. Don't know if I really expect him to repeat that, but at 3.4K, especially if Porzingis is out, I think we can roll the dice with Sam Hauser and feel pretty good. Just because what are the alternatives? Well, the main one is Xavier Tillman, who played 7 minutes in a blowout loss. With no Porzingis, we can certainly entertain Tillman at 2.2K. He played 11 minutes the previous game, had 12 fantasy points. But it's Xavier Tillman. I don't feel like really, really good about him. I would honestly rather play Sam Hauser just because, let's see, where's the ownership right now? Sam Hauser is actually, it's pretty close. Sam Hauser's at 20% and Xavier Tillman's at 17%. I would imagine that flips considerably. I would be shocked if Porzingis is out and Xavier Tillman isn't pretty darn chalky at 2.2K. You can play him. He's a fine utility play at that price for sure. I certainly feel better about him than Tim Hardaway Jr. continuing what he's doing. But it's still pretty dicey. They're still going to probably play Horford much more with Porzingis out. and then you'd get a little bit more Hauser than we've been seeing possibly. So I don't think they're going to totally lean on Tillman if Porzingis doesn't play. That said, he's 2.2K, and he did get 10 plus minutes 2 games ago, and he produced. So you can use him. I just won't be captaining him, and I won't be going crazy with him, especially if we look closer to lock and his ownership inflates considerably, which I expect it will. Luke Cornett is worth mentioning because he got 10 minutes in the blowout, but he really hasn't played that much this series. I mean, the only thing that really gets you excited is the fact that Porzingis isn't playing, probably. If Porzingis is out, you can take a shot on Cornett at 2K flat. You could bank on, number one, Porzingis not being there, and number two, Xavier Tillman not really playing well and them wanting to take a shot on Cornett. But for the most part, I'm looking at Hauser and Tillman there for the Boston Bigs for sure. The only other guy is Peyton Pritchard, 22 minutes in the last game because of blowout. He had 11, 12, and 16 minutes in the previous 3 games in the series, so very, very minimal role. He is usually a pretty good per minute guy, but he has not been getting it done in this series. I will mention, though, it's kind of noisy and there's really no way to predict it, but every time we get a NBA Finals, series clincher game, specifically for when the winning team wins it and ends the series, there's just this crazy performance from somebody that comes out of nowhere and just, is a surprise thing. So I'm Hauser and Pritchard are 2 guys that stand out that could end up delivering that. I think Tillman obviously is also in play for that kind of logic, but I would just sprinkle them in a little bit if you think this game's going to blow open and Boston's going to run away with it. On the flip side, who did that for Dallas in the last game? Tim Hardaway Jr., of course. So anyways, that is going to do it for me. For the most part, obviously, I'm going to get a ton of exposure to Luka, Tatum, Kyrie, Jalen. I would just personally be a little bit underweight on Kyrie compared to the field. If Porzingis is out, I love Horford. Mostly going to get to him in utility, but I definitely like him a little bit in captain. I'm going Derek White over Drew, but I'm not going to go crazy with either of them in captain. I still like PJ Washington at 5.8K, mostly in utility, but I definitely like him as a captain play just because if Dallas is going to have a shot here, they need their top 3 scorers to show up. And man, I've been preaching it all series long. Eventually, PJ Washington is going to pop, and I think it could happen here. So I'm definitely going to continue playing him in captain like I have been. Derek Lively is a smash play at utility. I'll reiterate, a little less interested in him if Porzingis does play, but I don't think he will. So Lively looks awesome. And then the value plays I touched on. I guess if I had to pick one value play that I feel really, really good about, it's going to be Kleba. I'm just going to really double down on what I've been talking about all series. And they kind of need his size and they kind of need his blocking and they kind of need his rebounding and 3-point shooting. He can play well and he can be an X factor for them, especially in this game, which is a game that, Dallas, they're coming in as 6.5-point dogs. They're not expected to win this game. The series is supposed to end now. But if it's not going to, somebody's going to step up. And I think at 2.4K, we can bet on Kleba being one of those dudes and sliding him in as a really nice value in the utility. All right, I ran a bit long here for a Showdown slate, pushing almost 30 minutes. But hopefully this helps you out. It certainly helps my process. It's not always going to be spot on. And hopefully you can just take the parts you like and, go to your lineup optimizer, whether it be Roto Grinders, wherever you do, and play with your exposures, run your lineups, and, roll into the contest that you prefer. My advice is to go a little bit underweight, a little bit overweight on certain plays based off ownership and try to gain a little bit of leverage on the field, specifically from the captain slot, and also just choose the right contest to do. I mean, I like to do single entries, or if you're going to max, I'd probably just do a 20 max and just try to take a stand, one way or the other. If you really, really like Drew Holiday, go throw Drew Holiday in the captain slot for a really good portion of your lineups. And then if he hits, then what do you really need to happen? Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown or Luka to round out like 2 or 3 of your other slots, and then you need to hit on a punt or 2. So obviously, winning and taking down in Showdown slates is not easy, but hopefully this all helps you get a little bit closer to doing just that. All right, that will do it for me. Thanks for watching. If this helps you out, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks and good luck.